Good afternoon and welcome to BizTech's Midday Market Watch. It's the 17th of November and our guest today is Jessica Amir, market strategist from moomoo, coming to us out of Australia. Jess, as always, great to have you on the show. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having us, Brian.
Now, Jess, you've been saying that markets are in for a strong year-end rally, and it seems like this narrative has got more legs. Give us your views on what's happening out there.
Yeah, that's pretty much the assessment. So what's happened, I guess, over the last couple of weeks, the narrative is in that the Fed is done. So now the market is actually pricing in a potential cut, would you believe, as early as March. So there's a 34% probability that the Fed can actually take their foot off the gas and then back it up and reverse the truck. So this is quite supportive. This is a huge tailwind for equities, and this is why we're seeing the S&P 500 really extend their bull rally. So the S&P 500 before coming into today's session was up about 10%. So we're thinking there could be a little bit of profit taking here, but the rally is pretty much set for course for 2024.
Now, this is a stark contrast to expectations in Australia, isn't it? Where there are expectations really of still further rate hikes.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's all about the inflation story. So if we think about the US, we did have that softer than expected CPI print, but for really that momentum, if we can just stay on the US for a sec, so for that momentum to continue in the US, we probably really do need to see more data in the US that'll really support the Fed actually coming to fruition and then making those cuts like the market expects. So just again, pondering on that. So the Fed is expected to potentially cut interest rates from as early as March and then continue to cut throughout the year. Again, that is only a probability. When that will be baked into the cake, I will probably need to see, Brian, another 4 to 5 soft CPI prints for really that 2% CPI target to really be in eyesight. In Australia, very different story. Our CPI isn't really slowing down. In Australia, down under, would you believe, our CPI just bumped up a bit. And we got this week jobs numbers from the prior month, really saying that there's more Aussies in work. And that essentially means that the RBA in Australia can keep their foot full throttle to the metal and probably hike rates as early as February again, would you believe? So, yeah, suck it up. Straight after Chrissy, straight after you come back to work, you might be hit with a rate hike. So really that sets up the narrative that banks, they're doing it tough in Australia. There's probably going to be a bit more dark and stormy storm clouds hanging over the financial sector. And for the Australian share market, that's 30% of our market. So it pretty much means that our market might be held back a bit.
Now, speaking of Australia and also then stocks that you've called out for, and we're coming up to the Christmas season. On your Christmas list, one of the stocks you've called out previously has been Block and Square. And since you've called that a couple of weeks ago on our show, the stock has risen quite substantially. Are you still bullish on the stock? And what other stocks are you looking at to add to this Christmas list of stocks that have a potential run-up?
Yeah, spot on, Brian. So I think since we first started speaking about Block or Square, they've had an exceptional run. So they're now this month's best performer. So their stocks, yeah, it's in a huge comeback, but we've got to put in perspective where it's due. It's still down about 80% from its high. But while we're thinking that there's probably going to be more momentum, it's not just about the Fed getting, I guess, baking in that sweet hot sauce from the Fed that'll likely bolster its bottom line, and of course that'll help consumers. But if you think about how Block, which is the company that's behind Square, which is that tap system essentially that you use when you buy a coffee in most cafes and restaurants, or you tap and pay for, say, your brunch, Brian, or your dinner, whether you're in the US or most parts of Australia. So they actually make 30% of their money from those transactions. And a lot of people don't know 40% of their revenue actually comes from Bitcoin. And guess what? The Bitcoin price, we know it's up about 140% this year. So of course, with Bitcoin being higher, really tapping closely at the $38,000 level, it obviously means the company's going to make more money if they're making a portion of their transactions from Bitcoin. So of course, it'd be remiss if you didn't think that Block would be a lot higher looking out 12 months from now. So that is definitely one to keep your eye on. Another one is Uber. So we're really liking Uber. Why? 2 straight quarters of profit growth. And we know for a company to go into the S&P 500, Brian, you've got to have 4 straight quarters of profit growth, don't you? And then, of course, you need another kicker as well. So you need 5 straight quarters of profit growth. Then Bob's your uncle, Fanny's your aunt. You can go into the S&P 500. So Uber is probably going to be added to the S&P 500 next year. And then just pause and reflect on this. Ask yourself what happened when Tesla went into the S&P 500. A bit of a rhetorical question, but I'll answer it. When Tesla was added to the S&P 500, their shares rallied up 89% to an all-time high. So keep that under your arm, and maybe that's one to add to your Christmas list.
Now, on that note, Jess, thank you very much for your insights. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks so much, Brian. Have a great weekend.
You too. We've been speaking to Jessica Amir, market strategist at moomoo, on BizTime's Asian Midday Market Watch. I'm Brian Fernandez. Check out the show on our website, www.biztech.asia, as well as our syndication partners, TV stations, radio stations, and websites. Thanks a lot for tuning in.